judges. This can include community members. This can include all different types of people. Those who can execute discriminatory actions against the minority group. And the fourth point here is these discriminatory actions at the individual level can become so dominant, so embedded, and so established that they can be observed as characteristics of places. Can be observed as characteristics of placing. So social control institutions become like their functioning becomes reflective of these discriminatory actions. And thus you can come to see the characteristics, say, of courts, of judicial surgery, of cities, of states, of counties, of countries. Having these units of analysis going to have more or less punitive. So the argument goes, where this process unfolds, those are the contexts, those are the areas, those are the units that are going to be the most punitive. And the perspective is a theory of punitiveness across places, across geographic context. So some places are more punitive than other places. And the theory shows the more punitive places are going to be the places where minority groups generally demonstrate political, economic, and status threat. When those things happen, social control mechanisms as a tool become mobilized to deal with threat. The reading that was assigned for today, I'm sure all was the book that came out in 1992. It was based in large part on the Blaylock book that I mentioned before. But it was a collection of studies and a collection of essays, and it's also very difficult to find. But the reading comes from the editor of the book named Alan Liska. Alan Liska, I think he's still alive. Blaylock, in fact. I think Alan Liska is still alive. I could be wrong. The book came out in 1992. And so the reading chapter, the sort of introductory chapter of the book, Liska identified a few different of social control that relate in general to the justice system that are actually much bigger than because arrest is just one type of social incarceration is just one type of social control that could fit into the perspective in this framework. There are a few others. The first, and this is the most dramatic kind, would be fatal control. Basically, social control mechanisms by which members of the threatening population are killed. This can include things like lynching, it could include police killings, etc. That's fatal. By the way, these are really good to have in handcuffs. Like really easy to make handcuffs. So, the second form of control beyond fatal control is coercive control. And coercive control in some way constrains people's behavior physically. Constraining people's behavior physically. Arrest and imprisonment are examples of coercive. And expulsion from school arguably is a form of coercive as well. It's important to note here that scholars have emphasized the importance not only of the actual application of control, the actual arresting, the actual imprisoning, but also like the capacity to do that. So a place that has a greater police force, for example, has a greater capacity to leverage coercive control. So we can look at things like police force signs in the same framework. We can look at it through the same lens. It's not just, and also can include a desire for, like the measure that we introduced last week. That measure of, do you support the increased punishment of criminals versus sort of like big events. And those who say yes, it's a kind of like, it's a desire for coercion. The third point, the third type of control, which is maybe my favorite, and it's one that I've been thinking a lot about, is what Liska calls the beneficent constraints. The beneficent constraints. The beneficent constraints are still controlled things. They still do controlling, They don't look it and they don't always feel it, but they still have the same outcome that is control. Still has the same outcome that is rewarding some behaviors and punishing other behaviors. The outcome is still social control. So Lithia identifies social institutions in particular that seem to have beneficent or otherwise seemingly good missions or goals or identity, but they still achieve the same outcome. This can include basically the entire welfare system. This can include the entire public education system, perhaps, going that direction. I might go that direction sometimes, but not that. Until it's silence, orphanages, all of these are institutions that are still doing social control stuff. They can involve the controlling of people. They can involve the controlling of people in ways that fit within this framework. They can be tools that are used by dominant political and economic groups to achieve the end of control, whatever that is. But they may appear helpful, but there's kind of a little bit of a dark side, Lister points out. Within this framework, what we've seen in the literature in our field for the past maybe 10 or so years is an increased emphasis on the medicalizing of social problems. Increased emphasis on the medicalizing of social problems. If it's a medicalized problem, what do you do with a medicalized problem? Everything's an epidemic. Everything is an epidemic. The CDC, for example, identifies health as an epidemic. Yes, kind of done by it becomes an epidemic, right? Specifically becomes an epidemic. Things that don't real diseases come described in these sort of medicalized terminology. And then what happens is it's a justification for doing something controlling about it. If it's an epidemic, then control that epidemic. So the idea is that even these things, these institutions that provide seemingly beneficial, maybe they're just one of other types of control. What we're mostly thinking about in this class, or knowledge class, not really necessarily focus on the next even though in that other class I mentioned that we're talking a lot about all that. We're talking about that. It involves the medicalization of the problem, involves the medicalization of social. That ultimately includes I don't want to go down here. Built-in links that hold that. One of them is like giving small boys medication. They sit still in school at age 6 or 7 or younger. That's kind of beneficent constraint. The idea is to get them to sit still. Why are we trying to get them to sit still? That's a conversation. But it's a type of beneficent constraint. I will do all of that. Okay. In the United States, when we're applying and thinking about this perspective, we're mostly talking about race. We're mostly talking about race. We're talking about other countries, we're not necessarily talking about race, at least sometimes. The theory is much bigger than race, but in the US, the way that we tested it and thought about it, explained it, and the way that Laylock theorized out was mostly about race. You could argue very easily that it's come to reflect a kind of broader understanding, say like immigration, in sort of a more globalized perspective, right? But most tests of the theory focus on race in the United States. So the idea is that we're applying this perspective to the context of the US. The idea is that whites' priorities, values, and interests are reflected in and prescribed by all different types of law, including criminal law. This is the majority group. This is the group that has control over social institutions, sort of generally speaking, so the argument of. And the theory expects that when you have minorities showing signs of political threat, economic threat, status threat, all these things combined. Where those things happen, where there shows of power you're going to experience a greater increase, greater implication response via social control. This is going to occur, at least in part, alongside feelings of fear and resentment and animus and perceptions of members of the minority groups as criminal. This is sometimes described as a fourth type of threat. And Elizabeth kind of talked about this a little bit, although mostly African, that this argument is developed. But sometimes called criminal threat. This is like a fourth type of threat. You come to identify members of minority groups as criminals. You perceive them as criminals. And you can see this kind of discussion really play out in the context of immigration over the past 20 years. And then the justice system and for justice system resources come to be seen as a way of confronting things like political, economic, and criminal threats that are posed by members of threatening minority populations. So now we have testable hypotheses that we can subject to empirical scrutiny. We can test it and see if it holds up. Find out exactly how the theory, first theories, about how the law works. Now we can test it. We need a testable hypothesis. So the testable hypothesis is that where minority populations are large and or growing, there will be greater punitiveness, quality of life. There will be more punishments and more desire and greater capacity for punishment. The idea is also this is going to be distinct from any increases in crime, for example, that are associated with minority group populations. So now we can test it. It's a big theory. Now we can subject it to empirical scrutiny and find out if this holds true. And there are, like the theory, I have to write a book challenge about it by December. I have to write them, but yeah. But it's already got started. It's December, but it's so exciting because the literature is immense. The literature testing, the theory, and all the kind of aspects of it, sociology and social psychology, about looking at it, and it's just like slowly down the middle. And now I have to write it 30 pages, 5 minutes. So you're gonna get the Cliff Notes version of the literature budget. Organized, I think, by like type of behavior, probably makes the most type of response, type of social control. That I think makes it a little bit more nice. So what the literature shows is that with regard to police behavior, for example, minority group composition and minority group growth is associated with things like police force size. It's associated with police use of force. It's associated with police use of deadly force. And it's also associated with police stops, especially unsuccessful police stops. Especially unsuccessful police stops. This is a really interesting distinction today, right? An unsuccessful police stop finds they didn't find evidence that provided probable cause to lead to an arrest. If you have more unsuccessful police stops, you can sort of see it as a natural extension of like discriminatory practice. Unsuccessful police stops, not police stops that are successful and lead to arrest, but unsuccessful police stops. Well, I think an interesting distinction thing here. Minority group composition and growth is also, but not always, associated with increases in arrest rates. And that's something we'll talk about again. The other types of police activity, police use of coercive type strategies, all of these things seem to be tied to minority status in a community, in a neighborhood, town. And it's important to emphasize also that we have to account for crime, right? So as I mentioned some minutes ago, the theory sort of underlying, not really a theory, understand it. I totally want because that punishment does more than just responding. Punishment is more and it's much bigger than just a technical response to crime. One reason for this, one reason that's obvious, and we know this, and it's almost like so true, it's true by definition, is that crime rates are a weak correlate of incarceration rates. I don't know if you're aware. Country level, state level, crime level, crime rates are a weak correlate of incarceration. How much we incarcerate is a reflection